All right, let's jump right into this explainer and tackle the absolute classic debate, nature versus nurture. For decades, we've gone back and forth on whether our destinies are hardwired into our DNA from day one, or if they're shaped by the world around us. Well, today we're diving into some deeply fascinating behavioral genetics that actually give us a clear, scientifically backed answer to this exact question.
We're kicking things off with a pretty profound question. If a child is born to biological parents who have a history of severe antisocial behavior, is their destiny already sealed? No way out? Or can the environment, specifically a stable, loving adoptive home, literally rewrite their future? It's a heavy thought, right? But the scientific consensus we have today is incredibly hopeful, and honestly, it's unequivocal.
There's this quote from the research that perfectly frames our whole journey today. Nature provides the blueprint, but nurture dictates whether that blueprint is ever built. I love that, because it proves that biological predispositions are probabilistic. They are not deterministic. Just because you have the architectural plans for a building doesn't mean anyone actually pours the concrete, you know? Biology is absolutely not your destiny. The rearing environment is the decisive catalyst here.
Section 1. The Gold Standard Adoption Studies, Separating Biology from Rearing.
So to really get at the truth of nature versus nurture, scientists rely heavily on adoption and twin studies. Why? Because they physically separate a person's biological DNA from the environment they're actually raised in. Looking chronologically across decades of research, we're talking tens of thousands of adoptees here. This undeniable pattern of gene-environment interaction just starts jumping out at you. From the Swedish cross-fostering study way back in 1981, all the way to the massive 2016 Swedish National Sibling Study, researchers have painstakingly tracked exactly how children with high-risk backgrounds fare in different types of homes.
Now, you really have to consider this staggering number from the 1984 Mednick study. They looked at over 14,000 adoptees. When neither the biological nor adoptive parent had a criminal record, the baseline conviction rate for the kids was about 13.5%. But that rate absolutely skyrocketed to 36.2% when both the biological father and the adoptive father had criminal records. It perfectly shows how genetic and environmental risks stack together. They compound to create this massive, synergistic risk factor.
But this brilliantly illustrates the flip side of that exact same coin. Take a specific cohort of kids, for example. When children with a high genetic risk, meaning their biological parents had criminal backgrounds, are placed into loving, supportive, pro-social environments, their conviction rate drops dramatically. It plummets right back down to 12 to 15%. That is effectively the baseline population risk. The nurturing environment is actively buffering and suppressing that genetic predisposition. It's wild.
Meta-analyses across all these landmark studies really confirm this delicate balance. Yes, genetics account for a massive 40 to 50% of the variance in antisocial behavior. That is a huge piece of the puzzle for sure. But think about the rest of it. Environmental factors, when you combine both shared and non-shared environments, make up the majority. The genetic inheritance is strong, no doubt, but the environment is ultimately the deciding factor.
Section 2. Orchids, dandelions, and warrior genes, the differential susceptibility model. So how exactly does the environment trigger our biology? Well, in modern behavioral genetics, there's this beautiful metaphor that researchers use. Some children are genetically like dandelions. They're stubbornly resilient. They'll grow steadily whether they're planted in rich soil or, a literal crack in the sidewalk. But others are orchids. They are highly sensitive to their environment. If you plant an orchid child in adversity, they'll wilt, they'll suffer greatly. But if you place that exact same child in a supportive, loving greenhouse, that orchid will bloom magnificently, often completely exceeding the dandelion.
A really prime example of this orchid-like sensitivity is the MAOA gene. Specifically, there's a low-activity variant that is often dubbed the warrior gene. Now, the specific genetic variant is linked to impulsive aggression, mostly because it affects exactly how enzymes break down crucial neurotransmitters, like serotonin, right there in the brain.
But here is the crucial takeaway. Simply having the warrior gene does not automatically make someone a criminal. The gene loads the gun, but the environment pulls the trigger. Landmark studies have actually demonstrated that males carrying this specific variant only exhibited elevated antisocial behavior if they also experienced childhood maltreatment. If a male with this exact same variant is raised in a supportive, loving environment, the genetic risk for aggression remains entirely dormant. It's completely disarmed. It's literally a non-issue.
Section 3. Epigenetics, rewriting the script and how nurture becomes nature. Let's move down to the micro level for a second.
How exactly does a loving family physically turn down the volume on a risky genetic code? Well, the answer lies in epigenetics. This is the incredible biochemical process where our environment literally embeds itself onto our DNA. Epigenetics doesn't actually change your underlying genetic sequence. Instead, it adds these biochemical modifications, like DNA methylation, that act as tiny switches. And these switches can literally turn certain genes on or turn them off entirely based on your life experiences. It's literally nurture dictating how nature is expressed. For example, early trauma or prenatal stress can hypermethylate or effectively damage genes like NR3C1. That damage dysregulates our stress response, leaving a person constantly in a state of high alert and prone to aggression. But conversely, highly nurturing caregiving actually alters the OXTR gene. It promotes healthy methylation of the oxytocin receptor, which dramatically enhances a child's capacity for social bonding, connection, and real empathy. The love they receive, quite literally, biologically, wires them for love.
Section 4. Breaking the intergenerational cycle. The active presence of protective factors.
So if we want to stop the transmission of trauma and crime from one generation to the next, we really have to rely on the active, intentional presence of very specific protective factors. Adoptive parents and caregivers in general can rewrite a child's biological chapter through a few synergistic steps. It starts with secure attachment, which fundamentally makes a child feel worthy of love. Then parental warmth steps in to reduce callous traits. Next is emotional co-regulation, which happens when a parent models distress tolerance, basically helping the child manage their intense anger or anxiety. Add in prosocial modeling to build a strong moral compass. And finally, authoritative parenting, which is all about providing firm but incredibly warm boundaries.
Together, all these layers of support structurally alter the child's neural circuits. It proves that resilience isn't just some magical trait you're either born with or you're not. It's a dynamic process that is actively fostered by the home environment. And this means a generic, one-size-fits-all approach to intervention completely ignores the incredible power of targeted, sensitive parenting. Different genetic profiles, our orchids and our dandelions, simply require different levels of environmental care.
Section 5. The Malleable Human Slate, where empirical science meets philosophy.
What I find absolutely breathtaking about this explainer is how this hard, empirical science perfectly harmonizes with these ancient, profound ideas about human nature that philosophers have been debating for centuries. On one hand, you've got John Locke's concept of the tabula rasa, or the blank slate. Now, modern genetics refutes a completely blank slate. We definitely have genetic predispositions, but it entirely supports Locke's core insight. Human nature is highly malleable and powerfully shaped by experience. This closely mirrors the Islamic concept of fitra too, which suggests a child possesses an innate, pure disposition that is naturally oriented toward goodness. The modern data gives this such robust validation. It shows us that even with a challenged, high-risk nature, a child's innate potential for goodness can fully overcome those vulnerabilities if they're just given the right environment to flourish. The goodness wins out when it's properly nurtured. I'm going to leave you with this final thought to ponder. Modern science has proven beyond a shadow of a doubt that biology is not destiny. Your genes are quite literally always listening to your environment. So, knowing that, how have the environments you've cultivated around yourself shaped the blueprint of who you are today? And maybe even more importantly, what kind of environment are you building for the blueprints of tomorrow? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep exploring.